Hey there, folks, and welcome out to the Single Player Podcast. I'm your one and only host, I'm 16-bit, and I got a good show for this week because we're going to be talking about PlayStation loses revenue, Final Fantasy 16 is almost complete, Nintendo's earning report, plus more. So sit back, relax, enjoy the show, and I'll be with you in a bit. Alright folks, we're back, and now it's time to start the show with my favorite segment, your favorite segment, everyone in the world's favorite segment. It's time for the gaming forecast. So let's see what's coming out in the week of November 13th to the 19th. Okay, on November 15th, you have 6 games coming out. Bravery and Greed for Windows, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One. Floodland for Windows. Pentiment for Windows, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X. Ruby Arrow Fell for Windows, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X. Somerville for Windows, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X. And Ys 8 Lacrimosa of Dana for PlayStation 5. Then on the 17th, you have another 6 games coming out. Card Fight Vanguard Dear Days for Windows and Nintendo Switch. Cyanotype Daydream, The Girl Who Dreamed the World, releasing exclusively in Japan on Nintendo Switch. Goat Simulator 3 for Windows, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series X. Monochrome Mobius Rights and Wrongs Forgotten, releasing in Japan on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, and worldwide on Windows. Return to Shironagasu Island, releasing exclusively in Japan on Nintendo Switch, and Sympathy Kiss, also releasing exclusively in Japan on Nintendo Switch. Then on the 18th, you have 4 games coming out. The Dark Pictures Anthology, The Devil in Me for Windows, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, and Series X. Spider-Man Miles Morales, releasing on Windows. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet for Nintendo Switch. And Ys 8 Lacrimosa of Dana, releasing exclusively in Europe on PlayStation 5. And that was your gaming forecast. Some interesting stuff there. I'm kind of mixed on Pokemon because honestly, it doesn't look like much has changed between that and Sword and Shield, so I'm kind of on the fence about that. But everything else, I'm not entirely sure about. Anyway, with that being said, let me know what you're interested in, and let's move on to our first topic. Alright, so for our first story, we gotta talk about Sony, because recently they released their Q2 earnings report. Of course, I talked a bit about this last week regarding their Japanese sales, but it appears we have even more stuff because things are not exactly looking good. You see, as it turns out, their revenue for this year thus far has dropped by 59%. And then on top of that, they also lost over 2 million PlayStation Plus subscribers after the recent relaunch. So yeah, things aren't exactly looking good for Sony right now, and gee, I wonder why. I wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that, I don't know, they've completely abandoned Japan, they censor games, they decided to release a console in the middle of a fucking pandemic that eventually turned into a recession. That said console has very few exclusives to justify the $500 price tag. You can't even find the friggin' thing in any stores, and on top of that, some games cost $70 goddamn dollars. Yeah. You look at that and you wonder, gee, I wonder why Sony's doing so badly. Folks, let me tell you something. I think the biggest mistake Sony has ever made in their entire history in the video game industry was restructuring their company into a single division. Because you see, it used to be that Sony was split up into various regional divisions, okay? And so that meant that, Japan handled Japan. America handled North America, Europe handled Europe, so on and so forth. But then around 2016, they decided to restructure everything into the Sony we have now, the PlayStation, I should say, that we have now, okay? Where everything is centralized in California and run by Jim Ryan, okay? And that's the other thing. Jim Ryan is probably the worst thing to happen to Sony in a long time. The dude has no idea what the fuck he's doing. He does not understand PlayStation in general. This is a guy who doesn't even have respect for the history of PlayStation, okay? This is a guy, and I've talked about this story several times, where he was at some event for Gran Turismo for the PS4 version, and he was asked about backwards compatibility, and he was like, oh, I was looking at all these old Gran Turismo games on the PlayStation 1 and 2, and I'm just thinking, oh, who would want to play any of these? These look terrible. These look awful, okay? That's the person running the entire PlayStation division right now. That's the person who is the reason for all of their problems within like the last 5 to 6 years. Okay? You know, guys, I remember when the PlayStation 3 was at its lowest point. You know, 2007, 2008, around that time. Okay? And you know what? It still was not as bad as this. Because at least back then, Sony recognized that they needed to change a lot of things, and they started to around 2009 or so-ish. That's when you started seeing the price drops, you started seeing the slim PS3, the Kevin Butler ads, more exclusives, when PlayStation Online was still free and PlayStation Plus was just an optional thing that wasn't required to play online games. That era of Sony was actually pretty awesome. I'm not gonna lie. I was pretty turned off from Sony around 2006 to 2008 or so, but when they started turning everything around, they really caught my attention. Suddenly, I was interested in PlayStation again, and I wanted a PS3. But here's the thing, I think the current PlayStation has fucked up so much that there's no way they can actually salvage it. None whatsoever, okay? If anything, if this keeps on going, if they keep losing revenue, then it wouldn't surprise me if the PS5 is the final PlayStation system. I'm not saying it's going to be. I'm just saying if it comes to that, then it won't surprise me. Because Sony, by that point, has fucked up so much that it's simply unsalvageable. Okay? And can you imagine that? Can you imagine Sony just being a third-party publisher, basically just pulling a Sega? Like, holy shit, talk about karma. Now, here's the thing. I'm not rooting for their demise. I don't want them to destroy themselves. If anything, I'm saying this because I want Sony to succeed, but they keep fucking up, and it's just frustrating to watch, because you know exactly what they need to do in order to survive, and they're not even doing it. God, this must be what Sega fans felt like in like the mid to late 90s, seeing Sega keep making mistake after mistake and watching that company destroy itself, and just thinking, my God, what the hell are you people doing, you know? Honestly, I think the only way they can really stop doing any of this crap is basically stop production of the PS5 for a while. Wait until you can get the shipping and production issues fixed, and focus on the PS4 a little bit more, and PC gaming, and also, you know, divide yourself back up to regional divisions. Because I think that was also a big mistake. Centralizing everything into a single division in California was a huge, huge mistake. Because essentially, you have Americans telling Japanese developers what they can and cannot put into their own games, despite the fact that Japan has completely different standards for things than America. And the same thing with Europe and other regions. I'd also recommend returning PlayStation Plus to being an optional service and making general online play free. Okay, that was one of the things about PlayStation Plus I really liked. The fact that it was this optional thing that if you wanted to play your games online, that was fine. But if you wanted something a little extra, you know, free couple of games, cloud storage, all that stuff, all you had to do was pay like, what, $10, $5 a month? That was it. Okay? If they did all of that, I think they could actually possibly salvage their entire brand. But honestly, I highly doubt they'll ever do any of this shit. It's a shame to watch. And honestly, I really wish Sony the best, but I wish they would just Alright, our next story involves good old Hideo Kojima. Now, I'm sure most of you know he has a podcast on Spotify called Brain Structure. And during the most recent episode 10, he mentioned acquisitions. Now, as you all know, there's been a lot of major players in the industry who have been acquiring as many studios as possible. You got Microsoft with Activision Blizzard. You have Sony with Bungie. A whole bunch of other stuff. Well, apparently, Kojima mentioned the fact that people have tried to acquire him. Yeah, he said, and I quote, "We are indies. We have no affiliations whatsoever and are not backed by anyone and are on good terms with everybody in the industry. Every day I am approached by offers from all over the world to buy our studio. Some of those offers are ridiculously high prices, but it's not that I want money. I want to make what I want to make. That's why I created this studio. So long as I'm alive, I don't think I'll ever accept those offers." Here's the thing. I'm not the biggest fan of Hideo Kojima, but I'll give him credit for the fact that he doesn't exactly sell out very easily. You know, he's enjoying his independence. He likes the fact that he doesn't have publishers telling him how to make his games, even though I do think that's to his detriment, because I always viewed Hideo Kojima as the George Lucas of video games, because, you know, just like George Lucas, he makes great stuff when he's surrounded by people willing to challenge him. And you can kind of see that in his older games where he had co-writers and producers helping him out. And then you compare it to his later stuff where he's the sole writer, producer, director, and you can definitely tell that there's a huge drop in quality. But like I said, I gotta give the man credit for staying independent and not selling out so easily. Anyway, guys, I'm gonna take a short break, and we'll be right back after this.
Under 25. License revoked. Driving without insurance. You're just the guy we're looking for. You are not ready.
Alright folks, and we're back, and first up on our next round of stories, we gotta talk about Final Fantasy 16, because we got some interesting news about it. Recently, a lot of the developers, the producers, directors, they've been interviewed by various publications. And first up, I thought this was really interesting. Recently, they were interviewed by Famitsu, 4Gamer, and it appears that we might get some release information much sooner than we actually anticipated. In an interview with Famitsu, producer Naoki Yoshida, best known as Yoshi-P, said, and I quote, "We are planning to release information again before the end of the year." And then later on in another interview with 4Gamer, he went on to discuss how quickly the game had actually gone, but also at what the development status actually is. He said, and I quote, "I was a little surprised that we got to Gold Master the game so quickly, since I have been used to the online game development environment for the past few years. When you think about producing the physical discs and shipping them around the world, it still takes several months of physical time after going gold. When you say that, the development status is 95%. Some may say release it right away, but that is the situation." And you know what? I'm kind of shocked too, because Final Fantasy development cycles within like the past 15, 20 years has gotten really bad. You know, because it used to be that we would get a game maybe 1 to 2 years at least. But now, like, it takes almost a whole decade. Like Final Fantasy 13, that was announced back in like 2005. And I think we didn't get it until 2010. 2009 in Japan. And then you get Final Fantasy 15, which took, I think, 10 or 12 years to actually come out. Of course, originally it was Versus 13, and then it switched over to the PS4, and then they renamed it to Final Fantasy 15. So, yeah, it's been... the Square's development cycles have been pretty shit when it comes to Final Fantasy. So I'm glad to see that they at least hunkered down in it and tried to get this thing out as quickly as possible. Now, the other bit of Final Fantasy 16 news comes, of course, from IGN, because they interviewed the developers as well. And it's actually a really interesting interview, because they really get into the development process of the game and such, and coming up with the characters in the world. And, of course, at one point, because this is IGN, this is Western game journalism, as you expect, they talked about diversity. Now, here's the thing. I'm not going to recite the entire thing, but I think Yoshi-P actually did a really good job with this one. He first said, and I quote, "This is a difficult question, but not one that was unexpected, seeing as diversity in entertainment media has become much discussed topic as of late. The answer I have, however, may end up disappointing to some depending on individual expectations. Our design concept from the earliest stages of development was always heavily featured medieval Europe, incorporating historical, cultural, political, and anthropological standards that were prevalent at the time. When deciding on a setting that was best suited to the story we wanted to tell, the story of a land beset by the Blight, we felt that rather than create something on a global scale, it was necessary to limit the scope to a single landmass, one geographically and culturally isolated from the rest of the world in an age without airplanes, televisions, or telephones." And he says, due to underlying geographical, technological, and geopolitical constraints of the setting, Valisthea was never going to realistically be as diverse as, say, a modern-day Earth or even Final Fantasy XIV, that has an entire planet and moon worth of nations, races, and cultures at its disposal. The isolated nature of this realm, however, does end up playing a large part in the story and is one of the reasons Valisthea's fate is tied to the rest of the world. Ultimately, we felt that while incorporating ethnic diversity into Valisthea was important, an over-incorporation into this single corner of a much larger world could end up causing a violation of those narrative boundaries we originally set for ourselves. The story we are telling is fantasy, yes, but it is also rooted in reality. In the end, we simply want the focus to be less on the outward appearance of our characters and more on who they are as people. People who are complex and diverse in their natures, backgrounds, beliefs, personalities, and motivations. people whose stories we can resonate with. There is diversity in Valisthea, diversity that, while not all-encompassing, is synergistic with the setting we've created and is true to the inspirations from which we are drawing. I think he really hit the nail on the head with that, but also he made a very good point, and one that I rarely hear from other people, and that's the fact that diversity in and of itself isn't bad. It's how it's handled that's bad. Okay, because for the most part, when people try to handle diversity, you get one of three things. Either it's simply used as a ham-fisted political message, it's used as the showrunner's vanity project, or it's simply because the writer is terrible at their job and can't write diverse characters in terms of personality and beliefs and such, as Yoshi-P mentioned. In fact, we've had games with diverse casts for decades, many, many years. The problem is, however, in the last few years, it's become so ham-fisted and just so shoved in your face so much that people just tend to kind of get annoyed by it. So yeah, I think he was totally spot on. There was also another bit of Final Fantasy XVI news, and this came from a trailer that Sony recently put out that showed all sorts of games coming out for the PS5. And in one of it, they mentioned Final Fantasy XVI, and at the very bottom, in fine print, it says, Final Fantasy XVI anticipated summer 2023, PS5 exclusive for 6 months. So, yeah, it's not going to remain exclusively on the PS5, it's just a timed exclusive. My guess is after 6 months, they're going to bring it over to PC and maybe Xbox. And if that's the case, then I'm totally going to get the Xbox version. But anyway, guys, let's move on to our next story. All right, next up, we've got some interesting news from SNK, because it seems we're getting a second collection of Neo Geo Pocket Color games. This time, it's called Neo Geo Pocket Color Selection Volume 2. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. The collection, of course, will include 10 titles, including Biomotor Unitron, Baseball Stars, Neo Geo Cup 98, Big Band Pro Wrestling, SNK vs. Capcom Card Fighters Clash, and this is the really cool one, Rockman Battle. That's right, the only Mega Man game for the Neo Geo Pocket Color is finally getting a release. Honestly, look, I got the first collection. I got the limited edition from Limited Run Games, and it's a pretty awesome collection. But so this one also looks pretty good too. So that's going to be coming out on, well, actually today, November 9th. So if you're interested, you can definitely go check that out. Neo Geo Pocket Color is one of those systems I'm really glad is getting a little bit more love, because it's always been a fantastic system. It's just barely anyone even knew it existed. Hell, I only remember it because I saw ads for it in, was it Disney Adventures magazine, like back in like 1999, 2000. Yeah, I used to have a subscription to that. But anyway, so I'm just glad to see SNK's actually giving that system a little bit more love. And there's some great stuff on there. You know, such as Samurai Showdown, the King of Fighters, Last Blade, Match of Millennium, SNK vs. Capcom, Metal Slug First and Second Mission, Gals Fighter, just a whole bunch of great stuff that I would recommend you all check out. So with that being said, let's move on to our next story. Alright, and our next story has to deal with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, because it appears that Nintendo's confirmed that it will connect with Pokemon Go. That's right. There is going to be some sort of connectivity between the two. All they've said is stay by for future announcements. But in the meantime, they announced a brand new Pokemon called Gimmighoul, and it's part of this collaboration. And it's pretty much the Mimic. You know, the Mimic from, like, I think it was introduced in Dungeons and Dragons and was later kind of copied in stuff like Final Fantasy and Dark Souls. You know, it's a treasure chest, but then when you try to open it, it's actually a creature that attacks you. Yeah, that's literally what this is. They literally just took a Mimic and just made it into a Pokemon. Nintendo, I think you're running out of ideas. What the fuck? Oh, boy. Nintendo, I love you, but yeah, you're really running out of ideas for Pokemon. At this point, they're gonna start copying ideas from that one episode of South Park where they parody Pokemon. Besides, does anyone still play Pokemon Go anymore? I remember like that was like a huge thing like 5 years ago, but it's really died down in like the last few years. I haven't touched it in a really long time, so I don't know. It's one of those things where I guess people are still playing Pokemon Go. I don't know. I'm not even sure if they added some of the later generations, because last time I played, I think they had just added third generation, and by that point I was kind of done with it. So anyway, with that being said, I'm gonna take a short break, and we'll be right back after this.
It's here, the revolutionary Neo Geo Pocket Color with 16-bit power. Linkable to the Sega Dreamcast. Revolving joystick. 146 color display. 6 cool styles. The graphics will blow you away. Neo Geo Pocket, way ahead of the game.
All right, folks, and we're back in. First up in our last round of stories, we got to talk about Nintendo, because they recently put out their latest financial earnings report, and some interesting information came out of it. First and foremost, the Nintendo Switch has officially sold 114.33 million units since its launch in 2017. Now, that makes it the 5th best-selling home console of all time, and it still has a ways to go until it reaches number 1, though I doubt it ever will. But that puts it behind the PlayStation 4 by about 3 million units, and the Game Boy and Game Boy Color by 4 million units. So, yeah, got a long ways to go, and you know what? If Nintendo is able to kind of keep that momentum going, we actually might see it outsell the PS4 and the Game Boy. And that would be just, that would be absolutely amazing. If you imagine if the Switch actually took the 3rd spot. Anyway, it is also sold over 917.59 million units of software since then. Holy shit. Like, that's almost a billion software sold in what, 6 years? That's pretty damn incredible. Now, here's the thing, though. They should be a little bit worried because, we're starting to get into the end of the system. We're in the 6th year, okay? 6th year, going to the 7th. It's clear that the system is starting to get into its twilight years. And I think what Nintendo should really start considering a Switch Pro. I think that's what they were going to do back in, 2020, 2021, when they released the OLED model? It was 2021, last year. Okay, they released the OLED model. I honestly think that their original plan was to actually release a Switch Pro, but obviously they saw the shipping and production issues that were hitting Microsoft and Sony, and they decided to kind of hold back. And I think that's why the OLED model basically has the same exact insides as a standard Switch. It just has a higher resolution screen. So I think, like, Nintendo should really consider, okay, we should start releasing an updated Switch, because that number is going to start slowing down. Most people who want one already have one. So yeah, Nintendo, they should really consider working on their next system. Now, of course, we do have some of their highest selling games of the year so far, which is topped off by Pokemon Legends Arceus at 13.91 million units, Mario Party Superstars at 8 million, Splatoon 3 at 7.9 million, Nintendo Switch Sports at 6.1, Kirby and the Forgotten Land at 5.2, Mario Strikers Battle League at 2.1, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3 at 1.7. And the interesting thing is here is that many of these games are now the highest selling games in their respective franchises. Like Splatoon 3 is the highest selling game in the entire series. Same thing with Kirby, Mario Strikers, Xenoblade, all are the highest selling games in their respective franchises. Pokemon, not so, because I think like the highest selling game in that series is still Red, Blue, and Green and Yellow. So, yeah. Pretty damn impressive. Nintendo also announced that some of their 2023 first-party releases are locked in for their release dates. So, Fire Emblem Engage, Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe, and Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, all their release dates are locked. There's no delays or anything like that. Pikmin 4 is set for 2023. There is no date at all. My guess is that we won't hear about it until... My guess is that there's probably going to be a direct sometime in February or March, so we might hear at that point. And Metroid Prime 4 and Advanced Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp are both set for to be announced. It hurts, but it is what it is. Here's the thing, okay? If I can wait 19 years to play Metroid Dread, I can wait a couple of years to play Metroid Prime 4. However, I'm still a little annoyed about Advanced Wars 1 and 2. Because here's the thing. First off, we haven't had a new Advanced Wars in a long time. It's as a longtime fan, I've been wanting one for a really long time. But also the fact that the game is finished. It's complete. Hell, last April, okay, someone who had pre-installed it onto their system, it actually unlocked. And they were able to play the entire thing. So, it is complete. We know it's finished. And I understand why Nintendo did it, okay? Because it came out, it was set to, like, come out, I think, like, 2 months after the Ukrainian-Russian war, whatever the hell they're calling it, I don't know, okay? After the war started, okay, Nintendo felt it was a little, too early to release something like that. Too close to home for some people, so they decided to delay it. Okay, I get that, but obviously this war isn't going to end anytime soon, so the way I see it is, okay, you have a game that's completely finished. Why not just release it? Okay, if Nintendo was like, okay, by the way, tomorrow we're launching the game, I'd be like, good, fine, just let me get my hands on it. So, yeah, Nintendo, please do that. I'm begging you. But anyway, with that being said, let's move on to our next story. Alright, next up, we've got some news on video game movie adaptations, and this time it's coming from Gears of War. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It's been announced that there's going to be a live-action Gears of War film produced by Netflix.
Thank you.
Fuck. Oh, boy. Yeah, Netflix. Look, here's the thing, okay? Netflix has, I'm sure as you all know, they don't exactly have the best track record when it comes to adaptations, as we've seen with, Death Note, Cowboy Bebop, Resident Evil. Yeah, they're usual shit. It's always terrible adaptation after terrible adaptation. The only time they ever actually did a really good adaptation was Castlevania. That's my opinion. I actually liked the Castlevania animated series. But, yeah, look, here's the thing, okay? I think my hope is that Netflix will have learned after all the terrible adaptations that happened in the past that not to fuck with the franchise or the fans. This is something that a lot of studios in Hollywood have had to learn the hard way. That when you take over an IP and you basically write what is essentially glorified shitty fan fiction and claim that it's canon, you piss off the fans. And then you call the fans sexist, racist, homophobes because they don't like your shitty adaptation. Okay? What happens? Okay? You lose millions and billions of dollars. Amazon just learned this lesson the hard way. Okay? They made a shitty adaptation that shat all over Tolkien, and then if you said anything bad about it, they called you a racist, sexist, homophobe, and looked what happened, okay? They lost $5 billion on that franchise. The first season was an absolute disaster that completely bombed, and yet, what have they got? They paid for $5 billion for 5 seasons, okay? They have to deal with this shit for the next few years. And in fact, I think it's been said already that the second season might not even happen, or if it does, it'll take like 2 to 3 years. Okay? Okay. This is why you do not fuck with fans. Because when you do, you lose millions and billions of dollars. So my hope is that Netflix will have learned. I doubt it, but I pray and hope that they have learned their lesson. Okay? And do not fuck with the franchise. Now, they're also saying here that the feature film will be followed by an adult animated series and the potential for more stories to follow, so sequels and stuff like that. I wouldn't mind, again, I wouldn't mind an adult animated series as long as you do not fuck with the lore or the fans, okay? So, I hope Netflix learns. I doubt it, but just especially since, like, did they lose millions of subscribers recently? I remember hearing something about that. They lost millions and millions of subscribers over the past, like, few months or so. Yeah, Netflix, you better be very careful with this series, because if you fuck it up, that's not good. You know, if you piss off fans enough, you might not want to, you might lose even more millions and billions of dollars. So, anyway, with that being said, let's move on to our next story. Okay, and for our last story, we've got some news regarding the latest Sonic game, Sonic Frontiers. Of course, I think it just came out. And Sonic's official Twitter account put out a notice for anyone who has purchased the digital deluxe version. They said, and I quote, "Hey everyone, quick notes ahead of the Frontiers launch. If you purchase the digital deluxe, please install the DLC before starting a new game. DLC content will not be valid if installed after the tutorial area. Ensure you have the most recent patch before installing DLC. If you pre-ordered the digital deluxe on Xbox and aren't seeing the digital art book in your library, you may need to search for and download it in the app section of the Xbox store." Also, the second point only applies to the digital deluxe DLC items. Future items, including SA2's shoes and Monster Hunter DLC, can be installed at any time. So, yeah, if you're getting Frontiers at launch and you got any DLC, please install it before you actually start a game. It kind of sucks we live in an era where that has to be said, where you can't just, pop the game in and just have fun, but that it is what it is these days. At least they gave gave everyone a heads up on this before the game actually came out, so that's pretty good. I'm looking forward to it. My copy is coming in pretty soon. I got the shipping notification from Amazon, so I'm totally looking forward to that. I'm getting the Xbox Series X version, and I might record it for the podcast. I was gonna switch over to Elden Ring, but I don't know. I kind of got out of it. Maybe I have to really jump back into Elden Ring. It's been a while since I played it, so yeah. But I might play Sonic Frontiers once I get my copy of the game in for the upcoming episodes. But anyway, with that being said, I'm going to take a short break, and we'll be right back after this.
Subject A, good hedgehog. Subject B, evil hedgehog. Introducing Shadow from Sonic Adventure 2. Now you can choose to be Sonic, the good hedgehog, and try to save the world, or Shadow, the evil hedgehog, and conquer it. What kind of hedgehog are you? Rated E for everyone, only on Dreamcast.
All right, folks, and that's it for this week. I want to thank you all for listening. Remember, if you liked any of the music in this week's episode, links are in the description. Also, there's a playlist called Single Player Radio. It is all the music from past episodes. I've been meaning to update it, but I just keep forgetting. Someone please remind me. I don't know, it just keeps slipping my mind. And with that being said, I want to thank you all for listening. I'll see you next week, and remember to keep gaming.